Let me paint you a picture. It's the summer of 2002. Gas is $1.40. Fast and Furious just made every teenager want an import. And on a dark stretch of road somewhere outside Detroit, two cars pull up side by side. On the left, a black 2002 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am WS6, 325 horsepower, naturally aspirated, pop-up headlights glowing like a predator that just found dinner. On the right, a torch red 2003 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra, 390 horsepower, with an Eaton supercharger screaming under the hood like a banshee that just got a parking ticket. This is the last great American street war before the horsepower wars went nuclear. And one of these cars was already dead. Now here's the thing about this rivalry that nobody talks about. These two monsters only coexisted on dealer lots for about 3 months. The Terminator started rolling off the line in Dearborn, Michigan on May 28, 2002. The last Trans Am WS6 rolled off the line in Sainte-Thérèse, Quebec on August 27. Ford's nuclear weapon arrived just as GM's Warrior was taking its final bow. This wasn't a rivalry. This was an assassination and a funeral happening at the same time. But before we get to the body count, let's talk about why Ford built the Terminator in the first place. Because this wasn't just another Mustang. This was revenge. See, Ford had a problem in the late 90s. The GM LS1 engine was embarrassing everything Ford made. The Camaro SS and the Trans Am WS6 were running circles around the Mustang Cobra, and Ford knew it. The 1999 Cobra had that humiliating horsepower scandal where Ford claimed 320 horsepower, but dynos showed closer to 285. Ford had to recall the cars and offer customers a fix. It was a disaster. So what did Ford's SVT division do? They brought in a man named John Coletti, and he had one job: build a Mustang so fast, so overbuilt, so ridiculously overpowered that nobody would ever question Ford's credibility again. He codenamed the project Terminator. Not officially, this was an internal name. The kind of name you give something when you want to end careers. And Coletti's first decision was borderline insane. He looked at the aluminum block from the previous Cobra, the same block that had caused the horsepower scandal, and said no. He replaced it with a cast iron block. Yes, cast iron in 2003, while every other manufacturer was desperately trying to save weight with aluminum. Ford went backwards on purpose, because cast iron could handle the torque of what was coming next. What was coming next? An Eaton M-112 Roots type supercharger bolted on top, the same unit Ford used on the SVT F-150 Lightning pickup truck, with a water-to-air intercooler sitting underneath it, 8 pounds of boost, forged steel crankshaft, Manley forged H-beam connecting rods, Zollner forged pistons, not Manley, the rods were Manley, the pistons were Zollner, ARP, high tensile rod bolts, an 11.2-pound aluminum flywheel, similar to the one in the 2000 Cobra R. This engine wasn't built, it was fortified. Ford officially rated the Terminator at 390 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 390 pound-feet of torque at 3,500 RPM. Those are the same number. 390 and 390. That's suspicious enough. But here's where it gets ridiculous. Dyno testing by late model restoration showed around 370 horsepower at the rear wheels with a bone stock car with only 2,400 miles on it. Normal drivetrain loss through a manual gearbox is 12 to 15%. Run that math backwards from 370 at the wheels, and you're looking at over 420 horsepower at the crank. Ford rated this car at 390. Ford wasn't being modest. Ford was lying to your insurance company, on purpose. Let that marinate. Now let's talk about the car Ford was trying to murder. The 2002 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am with the WS6 package. And I need to explain what WS6 actually means, because half the internet gets it wrong. WS6 is a GM RPO code, regular production option. It was a performance package, not a trim level. It added a functional ram air hood with dual inlets. Functional meaning air actually went in. Revolutionary concept, a lower restriction intake and exhaust. beefier suspension, 17 by 9-inch wheels with 275/40 ZR17 Goodyear Eagle F1s, and a badge that said, "I'm faster than the regular Trans Am." Under the hood, the legendary LS1, 5.7 liters, technically 5.665 liters, but who's counting? Of all aluminum pushrod V8 glory, 325 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, and 350 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. On paper, the WS6 made 15 more horsepower than the base Trans Am. But here's what the brochure didn't tell you. For 2001, GM had quietly upgraded every single V8F body with the intake manifold design from the Corvette Z06's LS6 engine, a revised billet steel camshaft, and deleted the EGR system entirely. The base Trans Am and the WS6 got the same upgraded internals. The WS6's real edge came from its ram air hood and freer exhaust, worth maybe 5 to 10 actual horsepower on a dyno, not 15. GM underrated both of them to protect the Corvette's ego and inflated the gap to justify the $3,000 WS6 upgrade. Both sides of the brochure were lying. And before anyone in the comments starts typing, the LS1 and the WS6 was still not the same motor as the Corvette C5. Same family? Yes. Same fundamental block? Yes. Same LS6 style intake manifold by 2002? Yes. But with a different part number and a different calibration. The Corvette C5 base still made 350 horsepower versus the WS6's 325 on paper. Different exhaust, different ECU tune. The WS6 shared DNA with the Corvette like you share DNA with your cousin, related, but don't pretend you're the same person. Now about that ram air. Let's kill a myth. This was not forced induction. I repeat, not forced induction. It was a cold air intake with functional hood scoops. At highway speeds above 35 miles per hour, yes, it helped a little. On a dyno with the car sitting still, zero benefit. The real gains came from the lower restriction exhaust and that secretly upgraded intake manifold sitting underneath. So if anyone tells you the Trans Am WS6 had forced induction, they're confusing marketing with engineering. But here's what the LS1 did have: simplicity. Pushrods, 2 valves per cylinder. 16 valves total versus the Terminator's 32. No timing chains the length of a jump rope. No 4 overhead camshafts to service. The LS1 philosophy was, make power through displacement and efficiency, not complexity. And enthusiasts loved it for that. You could practically rebuild this motor with a socket set and a 6-pack. So let's line them up, because the differences between these two are actually fascinating. The Terminator, 4.6 liters, cast iron block, DOHC, 32 valves, supercharged, 390 rated horsepower. The WS6, 5.7 liters, all aluminum block, OHV pushrods, 16 valves, naturally aspirated, 325 horsepower. The Terminator had a smaller engine, making more power through forced induction and complexity. The WS6 had a bigger engine, making less power through breathing and simplicity. Iron versus aluminum, technology versus philosophy. And the rear end. This is where it gets spicy. The Terminator used an independent rear suspension, IRS. Now, this is a big deal, because every other Mustang from 1964.5 through 2004 used a solid live axle. The SVT Cobra was the exception. Ford bolted in an independent rear suspension, upper and lower control arms on a dedicated tubular subframe, with Bilstein monotube dampers and serious brakes. 13-inch vented rotors up front with dual piston calipers, 11.6 in the rear. Sounds sophisticated, right? Plot twist. It had a problem. Wheel hop. If you launched the Terminator hard, and by hard, I mean the way everyone who buys a 390 horsepower car launches it, the IRS would do this lovely dance where the rear wheels bounced violently off the pavement, repeatedly, like a kangaroo having a seizure. This wasn't a rumor. It was so well documented that an entire aftermarket industry sprung up to fix it. Companies like Full Tilt Boogie Racing sold bushing kits specifically designed to cure the Terminator's hop. Some owners just ripped out the IRS entirely and swapped in a solid rear axle. Ford gave you sophisticated engineering, and owners replaced it with a metal beam. Beautiful. The WS6, solid, live axle, torque arm, and panhard rod. No sophistication, no pretense, no wheel hop. You launched it, and the power went to the ground. Period. But, and this is a massive but, it used the GM 7.625-inch 10-bolt rear end. The smaller, weaker version. Under normal street driving with stock power? Fine. Put sticky tires on it and launch hard? That differential had the structural integrity of a fortune cookie. Ring gear teeth snapping. Pinion shafts failing. Axle splines twisting like wet pasta. Both cars had an Achilles heel in the rear. They just chose different ways to disappoint you. Let's talk transmissions. Both offered the Tremec T-56 6-speed manual. Same gearbox, different cars. But here's a key difference. The Terminator was manual only. No automatic option. Period. You want a supercharged Cobra? Learn to drive stick or go home. The WS6? You could get a 4L60E 4-speed automatic if shifting your own gears was too much exercise. Ford said, roll your own or get lost. GM said, here's an automatic, we need the sales. Now, the numbers, 0 to 60. The Terminator, 4.5 seconds. The WS6, 5.0 seconds. Half a second doesn't sound like much, until you're sitting at a stoplight next to each other, and half a second means you're watching taillights before you finished your shift. Quarter mile. The Terminator ran 12.9 seconds at 111 miles per hour. The WS6 ran 13.5 at 107. That's a car length and a half, which in street racing terms means the difference between bragging rights and buying the next round. But wait, the WS6 fought back where it mattered. Braking, 120 feet from 60 to 0 versus 127 for the Terminator. The lighter car with the solid axle stopped shorter than the heavier car with the independent suspension. Weight, the WS6 came in at roughly 3,500 pounds. The Terminator, 3,665. That cast iron block, the Eaton supercharger, the water-to-air intercooler plumbing, and that heavy independent rear suspension subframe added about 165 extra pounds over the Pontiac. Ford's nuclear option came with a weight penalty, and the brakes knew it. And the price, the WS6 started at $32,090. The Terminator, $34,750, less than $3,000 separated them. For $2,660 more, you got 65 extra horsepower, a supercharger, bigger brakes, and independent rear suspension. For $2,600 less, you got aluminum simplicity, better braking, pop-up headlights, and the last great F-body ever made. Honestly, both were stupid bargains. Speaking of pop-up headlights, yes, the 2002 Firebird still had them. In 2002, retractable headlights that flipped up and down like a car from an 80s movie, because it basically was a car from an 80s movie that GM had been slowly updating since 1993. And you know what? People loved them. They were impractical, they added weight, the motors burned out, and they looked absolutely menacing. The Firebird's face without pop-up headlights is like Batman without the mask. Technically functional, but missing the point entirely. Now let's talk about what happened in the real world. Because these cars didn't just exist in magazine comparison tests, they lived on the streets. And on the streets, the Terminator had a dirty secret. That Eaton supercharger responded to modifications like, well, let's just say it responded enthusiastically. A smaller pulley, a tune, and a cold air intake could push the Terminator past 500 horsepower. On a stock bottom end, an engine so overbuilt that you could add 30% more power and the internals wouldn't even notice. John Coletti built a car with so much engineering margin that the aftermarket community worshipped it. The LS1 in the WS6, also incredibly moddable. But in a different way. Headers, cam, and a tune could get you to 400 horsepower naturally aspirated. Or bolt on a supercharger or turbo kit, and the aluminum block would take it like a champion, as long as you upgraded that glass 10-bolt rear end first. Both cars became legends in the modification community. The Terminator because it was overbuilt from the factory. The LS1 because it was the foundation of the most versatile V8 architecture in automotive history. But here's the tragedy that makes this story matter. While the Terminator was just getting started, the WS6 was already dead. And the reason it died is more complicated than GM couldn't sell them. Yes, sales were in free fall. The Camaro went from 122,000 units in 1995 to 23,000 in 2001. An 81% collapse in 6 years. The Mustang was outselling the entire F-body lineup, Camaro and Firebird combined, by nearly 4-1. But it wasn't just sales. The real killer had a government name, FMVSS 201. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard Number 201. Occupant Protection in Interior Impact. A regulation requiring energy-absorbing materials in the upper interior. A-pillars, B-pillars, roof headers to protect occupants' heads in a crash. The deadline for full compliance? September 1st, 2002. The fourth-generation F-body couldn't pass it. According to Scott Settlemere, the actual Camaro product manager at the time, and I quote, "We stopped building Camaros because the Camaro and Firebird would not meet federal head impact standards going into effect on September 1st. Any car still on plant property after midnight on September 1st would not be saleable. It would have to be scrapped, destroyed, crushed. The government literally told GM Jepter, fix it or stop." GM looked at the cost of redesigning the A-pillars, B-pillars, roof structure, and interior trim on a car selling 40,000 units a year in a plant running at 17% of its 250,000 unit capacity, and took a $300 million charge to close the facility instead. $300 million to walk away. That tells you how much it would have cost to stay. So, on August 27, 2002, 4 days before the federal deadline, the last Pontiac Firebird ever built rolled off the assembly line at Saint-Étienne. It was a bright red automatic Trans Am convertible. And here's the detail that breaks your heart. It was deliberately ordered by Scott Settlemere himself as a non-saleable unit, specifically to live in the GM Heritage Collection forever. He chose bright red because GM had offered that color every single year of the fourth generation. Ebony interior. The very next car off the line was the last Camaro. Also bright red, also a convertible, also ordered for the Heritage Collection. The product manager who oversaw their death made sure they'd be remembered. I'll wait while you process that. Meanwhile, the Terminator kept going. 2004 brought the Mystichrome Special Edition, 1,010 units with a color-shifting paint that changed from purple to green to gold, depending on the angle. Ford was celebrating while GM was mourning. The Terminator produced a total of 19,140 units across 2 model years, before it too was retired, replaced by the S197 platform and eventually the Shelby GT500. But it had done its job. The Terminator restored Ford's reputation, proved the SVT division could build a world-class performance car, and set the stage for the modern horsepower wars that gave us 700 horsepower Hellcats and 800 horsepower GT500s. The WS6 never got a successor. Pontiac itself would be dead by 2010. The F-body platform vanished until the Camaro returned in 2010, 8 years later, on an entirely different platform. The Firebird, still waiting. And honestly, this car deserves to be on someone's wall, not just in a museum. So who won this street war? On paper, the Terminator. Faster, more powerful, more overbuilt. On the road, the Terminator. That supercharged 4.6 was a weapon that only got deadlier with modifications. But in history, the WS6 wins something the Terminator never can. The WS6 was the last of its kind. The final, naturally aspirated, pushrod-powered, pop-up headlight, live axle American performance car from an era when cars were analog, dangerous, and completely unapologetic about it. The Terminator was the future. The WS6 was the last beautiful breath of the past. And maybe that's why, 24 years later, a clean WS6 with low miles commands prices that would make a 2003 Cobra owner's eyebrows rise. The market has spoken. Speed depreciates. Legacy doesn't. If you're still hungry for automotive warfare, our 2000s American Performance Legends series has the Firehawk, the Cobra R, the 5th Gen Camaro SS, and a lot more stories of Detroit building weapons and then panicking about the consequences. Check the playlist. Your algorithm will thank you. This is Car Chronicles, where the supercharger screams, the pop-up headlights rise, and the government decides when your favorite car has to die. See you in the next one.